Thanks for joining me on the papers this November 23, 2017. My name is Gladys Ambo Diban. We begin this morning with the French Daily Info Matin that captions on elections in Cameroon in 2018. The paper says the sum of 50 billion francs CFA is expected to be budgeted for the elections. According to the French Daily, the Presidency of the Republic has instructed the National Assembly to revise the electoral envelope, which was initially placed at 35 billion francs CFA. To have the details on this, you read page 3 of today's edition of the French Daily Info Matin, which equally captions or talks about small and medium-sized enterprises and talks about the fourth forum or international forum on small and medium-sized enterprises that opened in Cameroon's economic city, Douala, that was on Monday. The paper says it was chaired by the Minister of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, Laurent Serge Etudingwa, who represented Prime Minister Philemon Yang at the ceremony. And for Matin this morning says the forum is focusing on small and medium-sized enterprises and digital revolution. More on page 4 of Info Matin, where you will equally read the views of some personalities as concerns small and medium-sized enterprises in Cameroon. The Minister of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, Laurent Serge Etudingwa, says Cameroon's small and medium-sized enterprises have the interest to respect new rules as in the sector. The president of the organizing committee of PM Exchange, Periel Jean Nyondok, says Cameroon SMEs will bring an added value to project initiators or project owners. You have the details on page 3 of today's edition of Info Matin newspaper. Then let's move over to La Nouvelle Expression, which is very much interested in migrants in Cameroon or the migrant crisis, which it writes that Cameroonians have begun revealing the scandal. It says John Dal Carter has been the only one who have on several occasions denounced black slavery in Libya, a situation which was unknown to many until now. The exclusive testimony, the French Daily says, is that of the person who supplied images to CNN for exploitation. The paper writes about the weaknesses of African states as concerns the tragedy and publishes the exclusive interview of John Dahl, who says institutions and celebrities he contacted have never responded. More on pages 5 to 7 of today's edition of La Nouvelle Expression. Then the paper is equally interested in the General Voyage affair and tells us that 11 trade unions have petitioned the Ministry of Transport a month after the travel agency was suspended from activities following an accident on the Douala-Yaoundé highway that left several persons dead. The trade unionists in the littoral region are demanding the ministry to lift the suspension on the agency in question. Read more on page 3 of La Nouvelle Expression. Then the suspension of work on the highway Esse-Soir roads in the Mefu and Afamba division in the Central region equally makes news in today's edition of La Nouvelle Expression. It says 1 year after the start of work by the Atidov Nigerian Limited Company, the company has realized only 12.33% of work so far. It says the delay is as a result of 2.6 billion francs CFA arrears owed them by the state. The population to that effect, or the population that has not been compensated, has refused to leave the roadsides. To that effect, that is why road or work has been slowed down for a long time. You have the details on that on page 8 of today's edition of La Nouvelle Expression. Then let's move over to the National Bilingual Daily Cameroon Tribune, which tells us about universities and rooting corruption in the campuses of universities in the country. The paper says that sales of marks, exchanging sexual favors for marks, takes fake certificates as some of the vices that the National Anti-Corruption Commission is out to tackle within university campuses in Cameroon. They have started a sensitization campaign. It started on Monday, November 20, 2017. If you want the details on that, you read pages 8 and 9 of today's edition of Cameroon Tribune to have the details. And then Cameroon Tribune equally tells us about the 2019 AFCON competition and talks about the preparations. Japoma Stadium becoming visible. It says construction work is progressing at the 50% capacity stadium in Japoma Douala to host some of the matches of the 2019 African Cup of Nations in Cameroon. Parts of the infrastructure are already visible. The details of that story are found in today's edition of the National Bilingual Daily Cameroon Tribune. Then let's move over to another rare paper which we review on the papers. Here we talk about the M4 or the information. In short, the M4, the paper says that Mugabe used to pressure and finally resigns. It tells us about former vice president to take over and military assures peaceful transition. The paper equally tells us about heavy losses after fire got the National Assembly in Cameroon and question, but how's business still goes on. Then Fako Yoda Health Ndikosong Investment Group. You have that in this edition of M4, where fallen soldiers received military honors. That was in Bamenda last week. Then at 99, for Mukete says he's still strong to serve Cameroon. If you want the details on that, then you read today's edition of the Info. And then we move over to the Guardian Post newspaper, which tells us about the Director General for Customs, Fongot Edwin Novella, who has been elected as African Union Customs Directors Committee chairperson. You have that in today's edition of the Guardian Post newspaper, which says he was elected or is the new chairperson of the African Union, the subcommittee of Directors General of Customs that met recently. The astute and the erudite administrator was elected by his peers as the head of the strategic committee during the 9th ordinary meeting of the African Union that held recently in the nation's capital, Yaoundé. The details are found in today's edition of the Guardian Post newspaper. And then again, the paper tells us about Fonteche, who plots to prolong stay at the helm of Nowefu. It says the President General of the Northwest Funds Union, Nowefu, he is Senator Fonteche Njie, whose mandate at the helm of the outfit expired in 2014 and who has since been hanging on to power, has in a smart move which is seen by analysts as attempts at prolonging his stay in power, introduced the post of Nowefu General Assembly President. The paper sees Article 21 of the revised Nowefu Constitution of 2016, which was masterminded by the current and side-tight Nowefu President, Senator Fonteche Njie, states that the position of President and Vice President of the General Assembly is hereby created, and Fonteche, in Article 1 of the revised Constitution, states that the President of the Nowefu General Assembly shall be elected from among former presidents of the General Assembly. The details are found on page 3 of the Guardian Post newspaper. Then we move over to the Boyo division, where we have been informed that the fund of Com has disappeared, which that is in the language where it tells us that he is dead. The paramount fund of the Confondom in the Northwest region, he is Fund Vincent Yu II, has disappeared in quote. He joined his ancestors yesterday afternoon after a protracted illness. Fund Yu II, who was enthroned as the paramount fund of Com in 1994, disappeared at the age of 97. You have the details on that on page 4 of the Guardian Post newspaper. And then the paper takes us to Kumba in the Meme division in southwest Cameroon and tells us about Mokonje land disputes that takes ugly twist. It says the crisis concerning a disputed piece of land on the supposed boundary between the Mokonjes and the Bafors in Kumba Meme division in southwest Cameroon has taken a fresh twist. The long-drawn problem recently resurfaced following the dispatch of a commission of inquiry from the Ministry of State Property and Land Tenure to get first-hand information on the matter. The paper tells us that the inspection mission came after an earlier decision by the Minister of State Property and Land Tenure to withdraw the land title of the Mokonjes on Friday, November 17, 2017. If you want more on that story, then you need to read page 5 of today's edition of the Guardian Post newspaper. It is that article that brings us to the end of today's edition of the papers on Canal de English. Thanks for watching.